Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our panel. Dr. Feldman, I too am from Ohio, went to Ohio State. Mr. Cusinelli, you will see that in this committee, not only are we bipartisan, but we can actually work across enemy lines geographically as well. This is a fantastic committee in that regard. As many folks here would know, I'm somebody who wants to make sure that we are properly funding our research enterprise, that we're supporting entrepreneurs, in particular in fast-growing industries. And so, as a general premise, somebody who'd be very supportive of SBIR and STTR, I do have some questions around how we're measuring success. And I want to start with Dr. Tilbury. So you kind of highlighted some brief data points at the end, but I'd love to hear kind of any numbers you have or any barriers to acquiring these numbers around percent of companies that receive follow-on private investment, dollars raised, percent still operating versus acquired, employment numbers, geographical split. I'm trying to figure out kind of how we're tracking from funding to viable company.
So I might defer that to Dr. Feldman,
Okay.
but I will say we are trying to track all of those numbers, and we have data on people who get the phase 2B, which is a matching. If
Right.
you're in a phase 2 and you get external input, then NSF will match that up to a certain amount. So that number we absolutely know because we gave them matching.
Right.
But as was also mentioned earlier, some of these companies, the phase 2 is a couple of years, and it might take many more years until they're commercially viable or they're acquired. And so during that lag time, I think we are absolutely interested in acquiring that data, and that's why we work with the national academies. And you may not be able to say yet, but.
Yes, and so I am co-chairing the National Academy's assessment of the SBIR program.
Okay.
And I'm not able to really talk about our findings yet, and I'm happy to come back. Our report on the Department of Energy will be released in March.
Okay.
But, this is an important question because we have a need for government investment because these technologies are so early stage and so risky.
Absolutely.
And so it's very complicated, and this is where we're now able, with new digital technologies, scraping the web, to sort of be able to follow the sort of initial receipt of a grant to companies.
Right.
Sometimes when companies fail, that might be appropriate, right?
Yeah,
because the technology,
happens.
right, wasn't going anywhere. And then I think the entrepreneur, the entrepreneurial team, other people in the company will then be recycled and do other things in a local economy.
And then if I could step in for a second, Dr. Tilbury, the average grant size is what? So you talked about there's some who are kind of operating for years before they receive the follow-on funding. I ran a venture-backed company at one point. We didn't have years, right? You're usually doing it in 18-month increments.
So I believe so it's not an average. So the phase 1, if you get it from NSF, is $225,000.
Okay.
All in one shot.
And that'll
then
be
phase
2 to 3
2
employees.
has been increased now to $750,000, and then they can get matching on top of that, and there's supplements on top of that. So there's a lot of, even though that's the base number, there's a lot of extra supplements opportunities.
Okay, and then with my last minute, Dr. Feldman, so without getting into specifics of your report and what you're going to release, what are the barriers, the key barriers that you're seeing to acquiring the data that I outlined that I think would be helpful in terms of collecting it?
Well, and so ideally we would like to know who is applying to the program, right? And then not only, we now know through the SBA who was awarded funding, but if we could follow those who applied and didn't get funding, or did they come back, that's capturing another kind of learning. So that would be very valuable. It would also be much easier for us if we could access some of the census data centers and the data that is behind that sort of security wall.
Great, thank you. Yeah, sure, Mr. Cusinelli.
I don't have this in front of me, I apologize, but in preparing my written testimony, I found an Air Force report from, I believe, 2014 that is worth taking a look at. I'll follow up with your staff if you'd like.
That'd be great.
It did this across hundreds and hundreds of SBIR awards and came up with metrics.
Thank you. And as I said at the beginning, I want to be helpful. I want to empower you guys, but we need some data so we can just measure how we're doing. With that, I yield back.